That was a very quick, just bunch of positive thoughts on the Orlando Magic. We're on to the Washington Wizards. I have a feeling we'll be less positive on this team. Notable moves include drafting Johnny Davis at number 10. They signed Bradley Beal to a 5-year, $251 million deal. And then they included a 15% trade kicker. And then they included a no trade clause. And then they included a $57 million player option in the final season when he would be entering his age 33 campaign. They signed DeLon Wright to a 2-year, $16 million deal. They signed Anthony Gill to a 2-year, $8.3 million deal. They acquired Will Barton and Monte Morris for Ish Smith and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. They signed Taj Gibson to a 1-year vet minimum. And then they signed McCore Maker to an Exhibit 10 deal. Notable exits include Raul Neto, who signed with the Cavs, and Thomas Bryant, who signed with the Lakers. Grant, I'm very curious to know what grade you gave the Wizards.
So this is a D. I am totally open to the F argument, and maybe so. Just frame it this way. So the only thing that the Wizards did this offseason that has that will fundamentally affect this whole operation for the next 5 years and maybe beyond that, because sometimes when you get a deal like this, talking about Beal, the fallout it's more than the length of the contract, because once it's over, you're sort of like, well, the dust is only just settling and you're at zero. So the Beal contract, I think, is a fatal decision. And like, again, we spent previous pods saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be punishing the team for positions that prior decisions like forced them into. And speaking specifically about Beal, he should have been traded 2 years ago, or, slightly worse than that 1 year ago, or you have to trade him because you get into this position and now you've maxed out a guy who I think his best years may be behind him, and his best years topped out as like he was an all-star. He scored a bunch of points, but the team was no good with him playing just as well as he possibly could. Not all his fault, but we're just not talking about a cornerstone. We're not who's ever been a cornerstone. So it's not even like we're paying him for past performance. We're paying him more than his past performance at his peak suggested he was worth. And so the trend line of his career is either flat or heading down. You just can't do, and like the no trade clause is like everybody's joking about it, but it's just like, it just speaks to me of a franchise that is not operating like other franchises, and like in a bad way. It doesn't make sense. Nobody gets these, let alone someone that is not a top 10 player, is maybe a top 20 guy. I don't know. So I like the DeLon Wright signing. Like everything else is okay. The Barton and Morris for Ish Smith and KCP trade, different types of players. It's sort of, you could talk yourself into it. Morris fills a real need as a point guard on this roster. Those are fine. They don't really matter, because what's happened now is this franchise is committed as much as it possibly could to a player who is not going to return, sufficient, not going to have a sufficient return on that investment. And it just hamstrings your whole operation for a very long time. And so if all you cared about is that, it's an F. I only give the bump up to the D range just because there are a couple other things that were like logically defensible. So I don't know. It bums me out. I just don't understand. I don't like it when teams make these decisions, because we just know what we're in for, right? We know what this is going to look like, I think.
Yes, I gave him a D+, and I did consider a C- because I like the DeLon Wright signing. And then I think there's debate as to who was the best player in that Nuggets-Wizards deal. Was it KCP or Monte Morris? But you took what was one NBA rotation player and turned him into two, basically, in Monte Morris and Will Barton, who he's regressed the past 2 years, but he's still better than Ish Smith. And now another person that can give you some secondary playmaking on top of Bradley Beal. And then I hope they give Denny Avdia more responsibility. And you have DeLon Wright and Monte Morris now this season. I'm also fine with the Taj Gibson contract. I think after losing Thomas Bryant, to get him on the vets minimum is good. I actually thought bringing back Anthony Gill was smart. I don't have strong thoughts on Johnny Davis, but they are sort of banking a lot on, his offensive role in college was so complicated and overtaxing. That's what accounts for his diminished efficiency, particularly last season. So there's an element of risk there, but they also didn't trade the number 10 pick for Malcolm Brogdon. The D+ is entirely because they have put themselves at the mercy of Bradley Beal. I don't have a problem. If they would have just given him the 5-year, $251 million deal, this would have looked drastically different. If that player option was there, this looks drastically different. But and even fuck the trade kicker. There's always workarounds. Maybe he even waives it or whatever. The no trade clause gives him just carte blanche over not only where he goes, but when he goes. And yes, we know how it works. Players can ask out whenever, and teams sometimes, or most of the time in good faith, are going to take into account their preferences. Look what's happening with Kevin Durant right now, though. And Kevin Durant's a better player than Bradley Beal. They're on similar age trajectories when you think about it. Bradley Beal is substantially younger, but if Bradley Beal requests out after a year or two of this deal, it'll be closer to the age that Durant is headed into now. Like the Nets, we don't know what they're going to get for KD, but they have more leverage in this situation than the Wizards would have with Beal because they just can't send Beal wherever they want. And it's just, I don't know what it speaks to. I don't know why they felt they needed to do this. And if Bradley Beal said, well, I'm just going to leave all this money on the table and go elsewhere, at that point, if he's willing to burn the bridge when you've shown that you're going to give him this money, and I'm not saying they were doing him a favor, even though I would view him as a sub-supermax player, I'm in agreement that they should have moved him seasons ago, which is why I think they needed to re-sign him now. Yes, Bradley Beal had all the leverage. At some point, though, the market had to dictate some of that leverage. And if he said he was going to go leave a bunch of money on the table and head elsewhere, do it. Like when it gets to that point of contention, when you're already putting a 5-year max on the table, I wouldn't have a problem with teams doing that. Good for Bradley Beal that he's gained ultimate control over his fate while he's under contract. Good. Great for him. I don't understand why the Wizards did it. And now they can't even, they don't even get to decide how or when they would detour or deviate away from this direction. You're basically either saying, well, we're going to just run the treadmill of mediocrity till Beal's done with it, or they're obligated. They've been mentioning the Donovan Mitchell sweepstakes. I actually think their package, if they can finagle it, I don't think the Knicks are going to unprotect that pick they owe. But if you trust that that pick's going to convey in 23 or 24, they can offer some really aggressive star packages featuring Denny Avdia, who I know we're both fairly high on, especially defensively. But like, you've just limited your options in what was already a situation where you didn't have a ton of leverage or malleability to begin with. And now you're just, the rigidity is off the charts here. And I just don't understand how he had the leverage to get a no trade clause. That is a fundamental franchise malpractice.
Yeah, I agree. It's so I just to think about, try to like reframe this. What is if everything goes right, like what's your upside? You finish 5th in the East. I mean, 4th, and that's your peak. Like that's what you did this for. I just don't,
But it's like, well, that's assuming the alternative was just losing Beal for nothing or in a sign and trade, which I think you could argue wasn't the worst outcome. It's going a step too far after knowing you were probably already going to have to go a couple steps too far. And the logic here is just brain bendingly dumb. By the way, this isn't, I think Bradley Beal, and he negotiates this after he has like one of the worst seasons the worst season of his prime.
Right.
I don't understand it.
I would have been to get into this position. To me, that's the total failure up and down the executive ladder and ownership, whoever factored into the decision. Getting to this point,
and you should be disappointed in Tommy Shepard too, but this definitely falls on Ted Leonsis.
So all I'm saying is you got into a shitty position where you sort of felt you had to pay this much. Forget the no trade. You just had to pay this much for Beal. I would rather, if I'm the Wizards, he just walked. And like, it's a terrible look because all the stuff about you should have traded him still applies, but you've just compounded the error now. I mean, so I would rather just go into this season without him on. Again, great for him. We're just, let's be 100% clear. Super glad he got this money. Like, great for him. Great negotiating. Awesome. Just get what you can. But like, if I'm the Wizards, I would just rather have the roster spot and not be committed for $250 million. Like, that's just, I know when you put it that way, it's like, well, no shit. But that's just, I mean, how damning is that when you're talking about a guy that just signed? It's not like this is Russell Westbrook starting last year. It's like, he hasn't even collected a check yet. And we're saying this is a catastrophe. Like, that's been a long time since we've had a deal like that.
And with Russ, we didn't even say it with Russ. Like when John Wall signed it, ironically, the Wizards gave out that
right. Who should know but the Wizards?
But it's not even so much about the return of value on the contract of like, now you just don't even have the authority to change directions at all. And that's like, the more you could talk me into like Bradley Beal becoming an all NBA player for the next 3 years. It's the no trade clause when he is not. yes, there was only a handful of players eligible for one. He is not, even in a vacuum, how many players are you genuinely willing to give a no trade clause to in the NBA? Maybe 10, if
Yeah,
not slightly
maybe.
more. Bradley Beal is not one of
The
them.
thing is, though, even if there are those guys, the fact that nobody does it means you don't have to. Like even if
Right.
like Steph Curry doesn't have a no trade clause, Jokic doesn't have a no trade clause. You don't have to do it. No, it's not done. It's so if those guys had it, and then on down the line, fine. Like maybe, but that's a long ass line until you get to Bradley Beal needing a no trade clause.
And this is, just to be clear, it's different from us criticizing the Cavs front office for not paying Colin Sexton. And it was pointed out to me by Justin Rowan of the Chase Down Pod that the Cavs are also need to clear a roster spot. But not technically for the offseason, but they already have 15 players. But my point being, like, they're lowballing him. You were already giving Bradley Beal his max, in addition to a player option, in addition to the trade kicker. Like, it just too many steps too far.